Hello. This video covers Chapter 7, Bond Valuation and Price Risk, PowerPoint slides 23 through 27, where the topic is price risk and reinvestment risk, two subtopics of interest rate risk. For bonds, you have two primary concerns or two primary risks. One is interest rate risk, the second is credit risk. In these slides, we review some aspects of interest rate risk. So first of all, the slide says, what is price risk? And in order to kind of illustrate this, we're going to compare a 1-year bond and a 10-year bond. However, just to give you some sense, price risk is how volatile the price is as a function of interest rates. So let's look at this example. In the example of a 1-year bond, let's start at an interest rate on the left of 10%, right here where the cursor is. The price of the bond is $1,000. When rates rise, we see a decrease in bond price of a magnitude of about 4 or 5%. So as rates rise, we see a decrease in price. We see this inverse relationship between rates and price consistently in bond valuation. This is kind of one of the standard principles of bond valuation, the inverse relationship between rates and price. We can also see it as rates go down and price rises. Here you have almost a symmetrical increase in price. The same relationship exists for the 10-year bond, so that's not really the point of the slide, but let's observe it. As rates go up from 10 to 15, price goes down, however the magnitude is greater, and then vice versa, or on the other side, as rates go down from 10 to 5, price goes up. So again, we see this inverse relationship. It's true for the 1-year bond and the 10-year bond. When we talk about price risk, what we're talking about is the magnitude of the change, right? For the 1-year bond, it's a 4 or 5% change, positive and negative. For the 10-year bond, you can see the magnitude is 5 to 6 or 7 times greater, okay? And this suggests the 10-year bond has greater price risk than the 1-year bond. So as we look at the final statement, the 10-year bond is more sensitive to interest rate changes and hence has more price risk. And we could also generalize that and say, in general, longer maturity bonds have more price risk. Okay? In general, longer maturity bonds have more price risk. Let's see an illustration of that on the next slide. So here we have a graph, and on the horizontal line is interest rate, and on the vertical line is the value of the bond. You can see for the 1-year bond, it's a flat line. This suggests that the range of prices that this bond has over a long range of interest rates is small. So this volatility in price is small. If we look at a 10-year bond, you can see the volatility is considerably higher. Okay? We saw that arithmetically in the previous illustration, and here we just see a visual representation of the math we saw previously. What about a 20-year bond? What would a 20-year bond look like? So we have a 1 and we have a 10. What about a 20-year bond? It would look the same except more dramatic. So maybe it'd start up here where this cursor is, and whoops, I just kind of clicked on it. I didn't want to do that. Let's not do that. But it would start up here where the cursor is, go down through 1,000 at 10%, and it'd end up down someplace over here. Okay? A 20-year bond would have more price risk. Okay? So let's just think about this in the current interest rate environment. At this point in time, interest rates are very low, right? The Treasury yield is, between 0 and 50 basis points, and the 10-year interest rate is someplace between 2.6 or 7 and a little over 3%. So these are historically low rates. So as we think about this, in this environment, what is our expectation of interest rates? Well, you really need to almost have a PhD in economics in order to really make an intelligent statement about this, but in general, a lot of investors would say, rates are not going to go down, and they may go up. So in this environment, it would suggest price risk exists, okay? Because we have some increased potential for rate rises, or, that's common wisdom, right? I don't know if the PhD in economics would necessarily agree with that, but, based on the fact that, our interest rates are at historic lows, there is some expectation of rate rise. This would suggest a 10-year bond, may not be the best choice as it has greater price risk. All right. Also, price risk is associated with rising rates. You'll notice if rates fall, price risk is actually good, right? If rates fall, the 10-year bond increases in price and increases at a greater amount than the one-year bond. So for a decrease in rates, high price risk is good. Let's go to the next slide. All right, now we're looking at reinvestment risk. Okay, in contrast to price risk is high when we have rising rates. Reinvestment rate is high when we have falling rates. So this is a risk associated with decreasing rates. So suppose you won $500,000, and let's look at the next slide. Okay, you can invest in a 10-year bond or a series of 10 one-year bonds. Both the 10-year and the one-year bonds currently yield 10%. So for the first year, the payoff is identical. The cash flows are identical. In the one-year bond, you invest $500,000 and you will receive $50,000 for the first year. However, what if the rates fall from 10% to 3%, such that in the second year you only earned $15,000? Your reinvestment rate risk was high because the rate decreased. Okay? This is a risk associated with falling rates. Reinvestment risk is higher with short-term bonds. Okay? Now let's look at a 10-year security. With a 10-year security, because it has a 10% 10-year rate, is going to earn $50,000 every year for 10 years. There is no reinvestment risk for 10 years. Okay? All right, so this is an illustration of reinvestment risk. In this case, the short-term bond has high reinvestment risk, and the longer-term bond has less reinvestment risk. All right. Here's a summary. Price risk is low on short-term bonds and high on long-term bonds. Reinvestment rate risk is high on short-term bonds and low on long-term bonds. The conclusion suggested by your author is nothing is riskless. If you wanted to be a little bit, more thoughtful than that, you could suggest, it depends on what you think rates are going to do. Now, again, you may need a PhD in economics to sort that out, but, in this environment, again, historic low rates, we might expect rising rates. Okay? If that's the case, you want it to be in shorter maturities. If you can't forecast rates, you want to be in a spectrum. You want a diversified portfolio of bonds across a wide variety of maturities. And then another alternative solution is you match the maturity of your bonds to your investment horizon. So if you were going to buy a house in 10 years, you could buy a 10-year bond to save for that, right? And this 10-year bond with a matching time horizon of 10-year investment period, the house in 10 years, balances price risk and reinvestment rate risk. If you want to know more about that, you can read about immunization. So that's it for these slides, and I hope that was useful. If you have any questions, please post them online or send me an email. Have a great day.